In this unit, I'll provide a brief introduction to some of the main terms and concepts that we'll be using in this class. We'll explore these in more detail as the course progresses. This class is largely based on discussion, reflection, and prepared reports. In other words, thinking critically about a topic and communicating those thoughts. We'll be more successful in our thinking and communication if we share an understanding of the terms we use to reflect on and discuss these topics. So let's start by defining some basic concepts to ensure that we're all talking about the same thing. For some of you, these concepts will be new, while for others, the definitions might be new. In any case, it will help if we share a vocabulary of words that we can use to aid in our thoughts and in our communication. Let's begin with a definition of culture. This one comes from D'Andrade, an American anthropologist interested in cognitive anthropology and American culture. He writes, culture is the social heritage of learnings made up of understandings, beliefs, propositions, and values particular to a community that frames and informs action and is manifested in a variety of symbolic vehicles, such as talk, stories, gestures, and rituals. His definition includes three parts that are very common to almost all definitions of culture. First, that culture is learned and that is passed down from one generation to the next. So a social heritage of learnings. Second, culture includes understandings, beliefs, and values about the world around us. So our culture informs us. It gives us our world view and our world perspective. And thirdly, culture is expressed through symbols, including spoken and unspoken language. Let's look at each of these parts of the definition a little more closely. D'Andrade describes culture as a social heritage that is learned. The key points are that culture is passed down from one generation to the next, and that culture is learned. It is not something that we are born with, it is something that we learn. Infants learn their culture from the people around them. Cultural learnings are continually reinforced throughout our lifetimes from the people, organizations, and the infrastructure around us. Our understanding of the world and our place in it may shift as we adopt new roles within our culture. So for example, as we progress from child to adult, or as we become a mother or a father, as we take on roles such as soldier, doctor, teacher, and even retiree. Our view of the world is based in part on our culture. Culture provides a mental framework for interpreting what's happening to us and what's happening in the world around us. It encompasses ideology or ways of thinking about and understanding the world. Pierre Bourdieu, who lived from 1930 to 2002, was a French sociologist, anthropologist, and philosopher who examined power in social life. He defined ideology as the ideas, definitions, and mental meanings that allow persons to understand social relations and the world around them, and which are inflected by these persons' positions in society, as well as by relations of power. This ideology is an important aspect of culture. Culture is an interpretive frame that helps us to frame and inform the actions in the world around us, including our own. That culture is learned and not innate means there is opportunity for many very different and distinct worldviews. A worldview is how one perceives, interprets, and understands the world around them and their role in it. D'Andrade concludes his definition of culture as being manifested in a variety of symbolic vehicles. This refers to communication. These are sometimes referred to as discursive practices, defined by the French philosopher Michel Foucault, who lived from 1926 to 1984, as the actual system of signs such as words, pictures, gestures, and actions that are shaped by and incarnate particular ideologies, social positions, and relations of power. We communicate with others and with ourselves using signs and symbols. These signs and symbols might take the form of language, including spoken language, written language, and even body language, or gestures. When we communicate, we're passing information that is colored by our own worldview. This worldview is also present in the symbols and signs that we use to communicate. Can you think of some symbols and signs in your own culture that indicate relations of power? Are there ways of address, for example, attitude, other ways that you can observe when two or more people interact that would let you know the relative amounts of power each held in the relationship? What are these? Here are some other definitions of culture, and you'll notice that most of them include the idea of culture being learned, so not innate, but something that is learned, being passed down from one generation to the next, and also serving as a framework for understanding the world around us. One definition is a shared way of life that includes material products, values, beliefs, and norms that are transmitted within a particular society from generation to generation. Here's another definition of culture: sets of learned behaviors and ideas that human beings acquire as members of society. And another, ideas, beliefs, values, and meanings that different groups of people develop to express their understanding of their lives and themselves. Culture can also be thought of as an interpretive frame or something that gives meaning to our life experiences. Because it affects the way we view the world, it can also be thought of as a lens, such as a pair of eyeglasses. Culture also helps us interpret the unknown. When we experience a new situation, we can look for cultural cues to help us determine if it's good, bad, dangerous, or pleasant. Some people might also think of culture as a prison or cage because it colors the way we see the world and may make it harder for us to interpret a situation in a different or a new way. Now let's define indigenous. In a study of the problem of discrimination against indigenous populations, Jose R. Martinez Cabot, Special Rapporteur of the Subcommission on Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities under the United Nations Economic and Social Council, presented one of the most cited definitions of indigenous. Indigenous communities, peoples, and nations are those which, having a historical continuity with pre-invasion and pre-colonial societies that developed on their territories, consider themselves distinct from other sectors of the societies now prevailing on those territories or parts of them. There is great variety among indigenous groups. They speak thousands of different languages, practice a wide variety of religions, have many different ways of organizing their societies politically. They engage in different types of economic activities, have more or less differentiated gender relations, and encompass a wide variety of ecosystems. What is common among indigenous peoples is that they are uniquely and historically related to their homelands. That is the facet that makes them indigenous. Here are just a few common names for indigenous groups. In the United States, the terms American Indians, Native Americans, or Indians are commonly used to refer to indigenous people in general. In Canada, the term First Nations is used quite a bit. Inuit and Eskimo are general terms describing indigenous groups that live in the northern latitudes of the United States and Canada. Hill tribes refer to indigenous people occurring in the northern parts of Southeast Asia, so Burma, Thailand, and Laos. Aborigine and Aboriginal are terms used to describe indigenous people anywhere, but we most commonly associate them with Australia. Maori is a general term used to refer to the indigenous people of New Zealand and the Cook Islands, while Ainu is used to refer to indigenous peoples of Japan. Adivasi is a term used in India to refer to the ethnic groups and tribes thought to be indigenous. Because they reference a certain part of the world, all of these terms are a little more specific than the term native, which simply means indigenous to an unspecified area. However, still none of them are precise enough to refer to one specific cultural group. So why isn't everyone indigenous? Well, that's because people have been moving about the world, so not everyone has that long time connection with a specific area. Certain groups have migrated, invaded, and colonized new areas. Some places have experienced a series of invaders, one displacing the next. India is a good example of this. As new invaders arrive and settle, they may push out the existing people into the more marginal territories. The period from 1492, which is the year that Columbus invaded the New World, to 1640, considered the end of the Age of Exploration, is referred to by sociologists and historians as the long 16th century. During this time, European nations colonized most of the world in a quest for natural resources. There was a marked increase in capitalism during this time, or the production of goods for profit in the marketplace rather than for direct consumption or barter. Many factors contributed to the rise of capitalism, including the crisis of the feudal system due to the Black Death and the subsequent demand for labor, the discovery of America, the beginnings of division of labor between the Americas, Northwest Europe, and Eastern Europe. Advances in science and technology that increased production and eventually led to the Industrial Revolution played a role in shifting economic power and also cultural changes. Science gained prominence as the way of looking at the world, and this led to the grand narrative of progress, expressed by the idea that the human condition could and would continue to improve with the application of science to human ailments, be they economic, political, or medical. The very beginnings of a state political organization began to emerge during this time as well, developing in response to Charles V of Spain's efforts to create a Spanish world empire in the 1500s. The concept of indigenous arose during the colonial period, as native peoples were displaced and marginalized by colonizing powers. Of course, it was, and is, not always Europeans that were or are the colonizing powers, and one finds the concept of indigenous peoples in places that were not colonized by Europeans. We'll also be talking in this course about science. Science can be thought of as both a body of knowledge and a systematic means of acquiring knowledge. Two definitions of science include any systematic knowledge that is capable of resulting in a correct prediction or reliable outcome. In this sense, science may refer to a highly skilled technique, technology, or practice. Science can also be described as a system of acquiring knowledge based on the scientific method and to the organized body of knowledge gained through such research. Ecology is something else that we'll be discussing quite a lot. We can define ecology as a scientific study of the distributions and abundance of organisms and or their interactions with each other and with their environment. In this week's reading, Kretsch, author of The Ecological Indian, takes pains to distinguish between ecologists, so people who study ecology, and environmentalists. Environmentalists are people who believe the welfare of the environment is important and who promote this welfare. While ecologists are engaged in science, environmentalists are concerned with politics. We'll also talk about sustainability in this course. Sustainable is generally defined as able to persist over time. Something that is sustainable is thought to meet the needs of present generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. This definition was adopted by the UN's Brundtland Commission, also called the World Commission on Environment and Development, whose goal was to encourage countries to work together to develop sustainably. For something to be sustainable, it is generally recognized that it must consider social, economic, and environmental needs, so it's thought of as a triangle. These needs are recognized as being interrelated and inseparable. Carly and Christie in 2000 defined sustainable development as a continuing process of mediation among social, economic, and environmental needs. The triple bottom line is a term that also refers to sustainability. It's defined as a process of finding balance between competing interests for long-term survival and continuity. Recognizing that sustainability must include social, economic, and environmental components. To be sustainable necessarily includes being interdisciplinary, considering integrated scales, so for example, different time scales, levels of society, etc., and involving a multi-stakeholder decision-making process to ensure that everyone's needs are met.